Welcome to the Purple Positivity Podcast for August the 6th, 2018. I am your host, the amazingly adorable Rebecca Thistle, podcasting to you live-ish from my new used desk in my apartment, which I call Jeffrey Thistlework. Yaws. I don't know what it is with that yaws. But there's just something that makes me laugh about it, so that's why I do it. Because that's half the battle, is when you can make yourself laugh. So, as lighthearted as that sounds, I'm actually, today's a very sad day for me. Because it was a year ago, my grandfather passed away. And I've mentioned him on this show in the past. As time has gone on, I realized, that I'm not turning into my mother. I mean, I kind of am, but not really. I'm not turning into my father. I mean, I kind of am, but not really. But I'm turning into my grandfather. Like, I didn't really get a chance to get to know my grandfather growing up. I knew I had him. I don't want to say I didn't know him. I knew him, but I didn't know him. I knew of him. I did Grandpa Dean. That's what I knew I had. But I didn't know who he was. And then he called me up in February of 2016 and said, "Hey, you want to come visit me?" And I was like, all right, I'll work it out. And I went and I stayed a week with him. And in that week, I realized I am my grandfather's granddaughter. Like, this is where a lot of who I am comes from. It was so interesting to me, these parallels in his personality and mine. And I think most significant of all that I like to laugh about is my grandfather had, like, in, I guess you could call it, like, the den, the TV room, the family room, whatever. But he had, like, this one chair in the corner, and that was where he sat all the time. Or actually, maybe not all the time. Ooh, I got a little bit of hiccups. Maybe not all the time, but most of the time. And he sat there, and he had his books, and his newspapers, and his crosswords, and the clicker, and everything was within arm's reach of this one spot. And he'd get up to go to the bathroom, and he'd get up to go get something to eat and stuff like that. But that was his spot in the house, and everything else just sort of almost revolved around him. And I look at that, and I think back on that, and I go, oh my God, that's me. Because I have this spot on my couch that is my spot. Almost like Sheldon Cooper, but that is where, like, my whole life almost revolves. And I get up to go to the bathroom, and I get up to get something to eat, but mostly I stay in that spot. Just me and my iPad and my phone, all within reach. And I just, like, I laugh about that because that's how my grandfather was. Had this huge house, and he stayed in that one spot the majority of the time. And I'm not trying necessarily to eulogize him. Like I said, I didn't really know him. Everything I know about him, I pieced together both from the precious little time, comparatively speaking, I got to spend with him, and the stories that I have heard from my aunts and my father and my cousins to a certain degree. My grandfather was human. Oh my gosh, he's not a lizard? No, he was human. But he was not perfect, and I know that, and I really try not to deify him in my memory, because I know how he was, particularly to my aunts. I don't know all the ins and outs of how he was to my dad, but my aunts have intimated that when they were younger, he was pretty vicious towards my dad. My grandfather was not a great father, based on the stories I've heard. My grandfather was not a great husband. And that was actually probably by his own admission more than anything else. I remember talking to him about some of the things that went down with him and my grandmother. And he, in his later years, I really think he stopped and he thought and he went, wasn't entirely my fault, but I was a dick. And I don't know how much remorse he actually felt over that. I think he must have felt some, but I don't think he felt like remorse or guilt or shame did you any good, because in the end, you can't change the past. But I also don't think that he was really trying to change the present or the future. And I mean, by the time I got to spend time with him in 2016, he'd already been diagnosed with lymphoma. His doctors had actually given him 3 to 6 months to live. He ended up living another 16 months. And because that's just how he was. I don't want to look back on my grandfather and go, oh wow, he was an amazing person. He wasn't. He fucked up. He fucked up a lot. But what I do want to remember, and I want to never forget, is back in 2003, I was 17 years old. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Well, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. And what I wanted to do with my life didn't involve the beaten path. I didn't want to go to college. And I remember 2003, 17 years old, and we went out to California for Thanksgiving. And I forget where we were going, but it was just me and my grandfather driving wherever it was. And he was asking me about what I wanted to do with my life and kind of the dreams that I had, and I told him honestly that I didn't want to go to college. And I remember he got real quiet, and he said, well, that's a real shame. Brilliant mind like yours, college could do a lot of good for you, and you could do a lot of good with college. And that stuck with me. That stuck with me because, I mean, every person likes to be told they look good. But when someone has told me I'm pretty, it has never meant as much to me as when someone has told me I'm smart or creative So you can tell me that I outwardly look good all you want, and it's going to mean something. I don't want to discredit that in any way, shape, or form. But when you compliment my intelligence, my creativity, my spirit, I feel a lot better about myself. Sounds really crazy, but that's the truth. And so that always stuck with me. So he wasn't a great dad. He wasn't a great husband. But he's a pretty kick-ass grandfather. My cousins got to spend a lot more time with him than I ever did. And he was very important to them. He was pretty awesome to them. He was a wonderful grandfather. Maybe not a perfect one, but a decent one. He liked to help out where he could, from what I can tell. Sometimes he ended up, I don't want to say regretting it, but being a little bit angry because, he would do something good for somebody and then they didn't show what he felt would have been appreciation for it. But I don't think he ever really held it against them. Forever, anyways. But again, I don't want to sit here and say that he was perfect. And I'm also trying to be very careful about how I word what I'm saying. Because as I like to say all the time on this show, other people's stories are not my stories to tell. Because I can give you a synopsis of what my perception or understanding of a situation is, and I could have it woefully wrong. And so there are a lot of situations with one in particular, with one of my aunts that I don't understand completely. I have a vague knowledge of it. But it's not my story to tell. And so I've said it twice before. I'm not trying to deify my grandfather. He did and said a lot of horrible things. But he did and said a lot of good things. And it is difficult in a lot of ways to reconcile the two. And to look back on a man who bolstered me up in the most practical way